Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. The time is 6:01, and we do have 4 board members present. I'd like to do a roll call real quickly. The members of the committee could please just announce your name as being here. And I will start with myself. Rafael Munoz is here. Go ahead next, someone.
Rudy Lopez is here.
Okay. David, go ahead. Or
It is
Kimberly?
here.
David is here. And Kimberly, go ahead. Hello, Kimberly Tenorio.
I think she's muted.
Sorry, I'm here. Kimberly Tenorio.
Okay, great. So we do have a quorum and we're going to go ahead and start. I would request we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll put our hand over our heart, right hand, and I'll start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Item number 3, are there any requests by the public on the public comment period?
No, there are no public records requests.
Okay, hearing none, we move on to item number 4, the Crow report on the performance audit and the engagement scope. So who do we have from the firm to speak?
I'll jump in there really fast, Mr.
Okay,
Munoz.
great.
So this is Janae, and I apologize. For some reason, my camera is readily available, but not working. And so I am not physically present with you all tonight. So I'm going to invite Dr. Salkeld and her team. Athena Poros is here to introduce our Crow auditor so they can move through their typical and annual review and scope engagement discussion with the CBOC committee members. So Dr. Salkeld, if you're ready, we'll turn it over to you and then your team can take it from there.
Thank you so much, Janae, and thank you, Mr. Munoz, and thank you to the committee members. We do have our team here from the Crow audit firm. We have our principal, which is Kevin Smith, and as well as our audit engagement manager, which is Charles Ribley. And so this evening, they're going to be providing an update on the engagement. That's one of the attachments we provided, because we did meet with Mr. Munoz last month to kind of get his feedback and his perspective, but definitely want to bring it here to this collective group as well to get any feedback that we need from you. As well as just get some background, we'll have Kevin and Charles go through the parameters of Prop 39 and the different criteria that is the basis of their audit of not only the performance audit, but also the financial audit associated with Proposition O. As an update, we have been doing some preliminary work. We've already started some of the financial analysis and working with them related to the scope and pulling some financial details of the ledger, transactions, things like that. They've also done some site work. They were on site last week and visited our schools at Mar Vista High, at Hilltop Middle, and also Bonita Vista High to look at the different projects there and the work that's being done. And so over the course of the next few weeks, we also will be working very closely with them because they'll be back on site in October. So in working with Janae and her team, we're pulling a lot of transaction samples, things like that, that the team from Crow is asking us for in specific documentation, because we will continue the work through October. And then into November, the plan is to bring to this committee a draft of the performance and financial audits. And then we will also, after that, a few weeks later, in early December, we will bring that forward to the Audit and Finance Subcommittee, and then to our board in mid-December before the December 15th date. So that's just a little bit of context of the work that we've been doing and what we have ahead of us here. So I'd like to hand over to Kevin and to Charles for them to walk through the PowerPoint presentation they have and provide details on the engagement. I think it's Kevin.
Yeah.
And I believe, who is it? Yoli, you'll be sharing the screen and walking through, or is that going to be the Crow team?
Yes, if you would like me to, I'm ready.
Okay, we can handle it either way. I'll go ahead and take lead on the communications and kind of going through the PowerPoint presentation that we have for you today. As Dr. Sockeld mentioned, my name is Charles Ribley. I'm Senior Manager with Crow and kind of leading the bond component of the audit. And so the scope including kind of twofold. If you want to go ahead and jump to the next page there, this agenda, which we'll go through, fairly swiftly, but I want to give time also to answer any questions that you may have. And if you perhaps saw this similar introductory presentation prior year, you may see some in the prior year. You might have seen some information that will look familiar. So this we'll talk a little bit about who we are that are going to be serving on your audit team. Talk through some communications that we need to make as your auditors, and also some considerations in that as your role as those charged with governance or with the committee. And then some of the requirements and the accounting standards that we're following and performing these audits over Proposition O. Moving into what the financial audit components need to include. So what do the financial statements need to look like that will relate to Proposition O? And then the other scope and beyond the financial statement audit is the performance audit. And so we'll look through what are those required procedures based on the CDE Ed Code, what we're required to be performing, and then also the expanded procedures that we've agreed to conduct over and above what's required by the state education code. So we can go ahead and advance there. So as I mentioned, the team, so a little bit different, the team this year than it was at the beginning of last year's audit, only to include myself. Kevin is going to be continuing as your audit engagement partner, and so he's the guy that will sign the audit opinions at the culmination of our work over the performance audit and the financial statements. We have a secondary role person here, a technical advisory partner. Her name is Christine Torres, and she also provides some assistance as far as the quality assurance and just really a quality control level over and above what we have as the third category here of quality control, which is we call it our assurance professionals practice. So Brian and Tony lead the charge on new accounting standards, new auditing standards, making sure that as a final check that we've included everything we needed to in your financial statements for the bond, and that we've considered everything we needed to from an audit perspective. And then my role as your senior manager really is to conduct the direct review that's done by the staff, act as a backstop for questions as you are working through your fiscal year. If you have questions on the bond expenditures or on compliance, then I'm there to answer questions for that. And all just overall overseeing the audit process and kind of continuing through to that completion phase and presenting the results to the board and to yourselves as the committee.
Charles, I think it's important to point out that, and this is consistent with previous years, that we recognize that it's important both to district management as well as CBOC to have a separate and distinct senior manager. Elizabeth Saab serves as the senior manager on the district financial statements and the grant compliance, and Charles's only focus is here on the financial statement audit and the performance audit of the Propo bonds. So it just provides a different perspective and focal point on this engagement.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. That's a good point. So my role is directly for the bond audit and not for the district audit. So we've got sort of a separate leader for that group. We can go ahead and continue to the next slide. So planning, communications, and considerations. So these four sort of boxes here are highlighting some important points. We do incorporate the concept of materiality as we go through our planning and the execution of the audit process. So we consider whether something is significant to the financial statements of the Proposition O bonds or to the performance audit procedures. So we look to incorporate that into our assessment as to whether something is significant for testing, or if there's an issue, whether it's significant to the financial statements or the performance audit. I will note that we haven't identified any concerns thus far in our procedures, although we still have work to do. Addressing significant risks of material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. So our planning process and the audit process overall requires that we incorporate risks of material misstatement. And what does that really mean? What that means is we're looking to see where are the areas that are more or less susceptible to having an issue, whether it's, again, by something executed intentionally or by a mistake or an error. So we're saying what areas of the financials are more at risk of having an issue, and that's where we tend to focus our procedures, and that's really standard audit methodology. It's not something necessarily unique to this, but we wanted to call out that process and that step. I will note our responsibility on this third block here, our responsibility to communicate any evidence of fraud. So if in our conducting our procedures, we identify an issue that we believe is evidence of fraud, we would be bringing that to your attention and to the board's attention and to management. But we would definitely be bringing it to the board and to yourselves as the committee if we identified any concerns along the way. Obviously, we would formally communicate those types of issues at the culmination of the audit, but as we identify things, if we had concerns, we would bring it to your attention right away. And as part of this meeting, the last bullet point or block here, it talks about views of the CBOC and the areas that warrant particular attention. So we want to hear your concerns, and we met with the chair of the CBOC previously to understand any immediate issues or concerns that you wanted to be elevated in the audit process. That's not the only forum, but it is our first sort of line of defense, and we are willing and wanting to hear any concerns that you want to have elevated in the audit process. So as we go through this presentation, if you have any concerns and you want us to focus on something differently or a little bit more intently, we can certainly do that. We've already incorporated some of those concerns as part of the additional audit procedures that we've agreed to perform, and we'll discuss a little later in the slides. You can go to the next slide, and feel free to raise a hand or chime in if you have a question along the way.
Yeah, can I ask? This is Rudy Lopez. Can I ask a question here?
Certainly.
Mr. Chair, on this third point on Crow's responsibility to communicate evidence, you mentioned that it's to the CBOC and to the board. Is it your responsibility also to communicate to a third party, or is it just to the CBOC and to the governing board?
I mean, we are engaged to by the Board of Education or Board of Trustees to perform the external audit, and that's who we report to as those charged with governance. Under the auditing standards, we report to those charged with governance. And I don't know, Kevin, I don't know if you have another thought on that. We're not required to report externally to a party, although these financial statements are public at the culmination of the audit if we had reported fraud.
No, I think you've answered that, Charles. And the other kind of nuance, if we identified risk of fraud or areas that we believed were indicative of fraud, we would report that to the CBOC as well as the board. We're not attorneys, we're not law enforcement. We're not able to say fraud occurred. So at that point in time, it really becomes the responsibility of those charged with governance as well as management to determine proper course of action. But as Charles said, all of our reports are available for public information as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let me ask,
Kevin.
Rudy, did you have some concern about something being reported outside of our board or our committee, or something that should be reported, or is what were your concerns?
No. I just wanted to know if that's something that stays within within our purview, CBOC and the board, or if that automatically gets sent to somebody else. I don't have. Okay. I don't necessarily have a concern. It was just I wanted to make sure.
Sure. Understanding the process.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. This slide here in front of you, and it really kind of reiterate some things that you already know, especially as it relates to the committee and to the board, but really wanted to just highlight what those responsibilities are for each of these primary roles in the audit process. And so the Oversight Committee, those charged with governance, which in this case is your board, management of the district, and then CRO. And so each of these responsibilities each of these roles has their distinct responsibility as it relates to the audit process and to the financial statements of the bonds. So I won't go through each one individually. So we can, but if there's questions on those, I'm sure I can answer them. But we can continue to the next slide. So requirements and standards. Really, this slide is dedicated to just clarifying where do these requirements come from that result in a performance audit and a financial statement audit. And so there are several different kind of components or audit requirements and reporting requirements that come together. And so you can see here we've got the California Constitution, the Education Code, which I referenced earlier, the Audit Guide, which summarizes procedures that the state has identified as relevant and important for us to perform as auditors. And then government auditing standards are what we call the Yellow Book, which is the standards that we follow in conducting a financial statement audit and a performance audit. And so those kind of all come together to require this financial and performance audit for Propo. That's the source. You can go ahead and continue on. So some of the required report components for the financial statements. So this is written into the audit guide, Appendix A. Appendix A is dedicated specifically to the general obligation bonds audit requirements. So it's basically telling us as auditors what we need to do on an audit, whether it be for the financial statements or for the performance audit. And in this case, it tells us each of the components that need to be included in those financial statements. So table of contents, the financial section, which is your actual financial statements, meaning your balance sheet, income statement. The independent auditor's report is included in that financial section, as I mentioned, the balance sheet, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, which is the fancy government phrase terminology for income statement. And then the notes to the financial statements, which is really giving clarification to the reader as far as what is included in those financials, right? And some of the policies that management and the district have over how to account for those financial statements and what's included there. Letter G there is our report on internal control required by government auditing standards. And so we are required, because again, this is a governmental entity and we're required to follow government auditing standards, we have an opinion that follows that. So we have a second opinion. If we have any findings or recommendations or findings that were identified in the prior year, we're required to include those right in that report as well. And that's all written into the audit guide that we follow. And you can go ahead and continue on. So for the performance audit, again, there's two different scopes here. We're looking at the previous slide was talking about the financial statements. So looking at Prop O financial position as a standalone basis separate from the district audit. And the performance audit is really looking at what are those expenditures that were made from the proceeds that you received, and were they compliant with Prop 39? Were they compliant with your project list? And again, some additional procedures that we were agreed to perform for Sweetwater. So the report components that need to be included under the audit guide is A, the objectives, the scope, and the methodology of the audit. B, the results of the audit, any findings, conclusions. If there's recommendations, then we need to include those as well. C, a statement about the auditor's compliance with government auditing standards. And a summary of any views of responsible officials, D. And if there's if applicable, the nature of any confidential or sensitive information that was omitted. I don't see a lot of occasions where letters D and E have been included, and primarily those are included where you have findings and other information that needed to be reported relative to these reports. And you know, if we have findings, we have to consider those additional components. So usually A, B, and C are the primary components that are included in those reports. Okay, we can go to the next slide here. So these required performance audit procedures, really, this is listing out what the audit guide, the basic minimum procedures that we need to perform as your auditor for a bond. And so we're looking at a selected sample of expenditures that were charged to these projects and looking at the supporting documentation to make sure that they were expended properly. So what does that mean? It means that we're looking at the supporting documentation such as invoices, the warrant that was paid, the purchase order if applicable, the bidding process to see if those were appropriate expenditures relative to what was approved under the ballot measure or proposition, and also in your specific project list that's been approved by the board. And we're also in that process looking to see that they were related to the construction that were on those other authorized bond projects. If there were salaries that were charged to the bond, we also are looking to see that those salaries were for a nature that was reasonable under the interpretation of the California Attorney General. So what that means is you wouldn't expect to see teacher salaries charged to the bonds. You wouldn't expect to see administrator salaries charged to the bonds unless those individuals were specifically working on the management of the bond project. So if there was an accountant, for example, that was allowed to or working specifically on the accounting for the bond, that salary is allowable, just as an example. And there are other allowable purposes. And if there were disallowed expenditures, or if there were things that were made for unauthorized projects, then we would have a finding in the audit report, and that we'd have to follow the government auditing standards for how we report that finding. Okay, so continue on. We have some example procedures here. I won't go through the detailed exact language here, but really it's going back to what I described in the previous slide, is here looking at that expenditure and saying, did that comply with Prop O language in the ballot? Did it comply with the specific project list? Was it for something that was on your overall need here for the project? And so this example really is listing out exactly what we tested. It will look very similar to this in the ultimate performance audit report for this procedure. Okay, next slide. And then these expanded audit procedures, you know, we'll talk a little bit about this here, but we've agreed between the district and CRO to perform some additional procedures over and above that which is required. And so the first one here being compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So we're looking at public contract code and bidding to make sure that these contracts followed the bidding process that the district had in place and that is required by public contract code. Again, this is a sample procedure, an example procedure, so the exact number of contracts we review may be different in the end result that you see later in the year. Okay. Compliance with district policy for change orders, and this is another one that's been added in over and above the minimum required. So we're looking to see on a sample of change orders that the district's management followed the board policy and again followed public contract code for that change order. And to reiterate, if you're not immediately familiar with the change order process, a change order would be an additional cost for something over and above what was originally agreed to with that vendor, and so the cost was going to go up, and so you needed to go through your process to be able to pay that vendor that additional cost. So we're going to be testing a sample of expenditures or sample of change orders for that in that regard. Next slide. And then the next one, bond expenditures and record keeping. So looking that the individual contract awards agree to the total project expenditures. So making sure that those project expenditure tracking system followed the policy and followed what was agreed to there. So we're going to be testing a sample of projects on that as well. to make sure your budget process. Go ahead. And then determine if selected project Proposition O projects are real and exist. So this is where Dr. Sockfield mentioned, that we visited sites. So we sample some sites to visit to make sure that they do indeed exist and those projects are moving forward visibly. And so if there's any concerns there, we would have a reported finding as well. And the next item on the bottom of this slide is if there were any transfers made to and from bond funds that were made during the year, then we would look to make sure that those were appropriate. Those sorts of transfers in and out of bond funds are allowable. Sort of borrowing of funds from bond funds is allowable in some cases for short-term cash flow needs. I don't see it a whole lot of times, but if we do have expenditures that or transfers that occurred, then we will be testing a sample of those. Okay. And then verify that the rates charged by professional service organizations were consistent with the contracted rates. So that's another important component that we'll be testing and is in the process of testing currently. And if there's any exceptions to that, we will again be reporting that out as well. I don't anticipate any currently, but we're again still working on that. Okay. Documentation of program management procedures. So determining that the management team has a plan to monitor the planning and execution of projects in place and verify that project status is communicated to the CBOC. And so again, looking through inquiries, doing this through inquiries of management, looking at supporting documentation of communications with you all as the Bond Oversight Committee to make sure that that is being followed as expected. And there's some example language as far as what we would be expecting to see in the report as well. Okay. And then this slide really is talking about whether the communicated project status is correct. So whatever you've been told as a Bond Oversight Committee, is that being has that been consistent with what we're seeing in the other documentation that we've been able to review and been provided by management. Okay. And then looking to make sure that you approved, the governing board has approved the budget and position control. And so relatively straightforward procedure, but we'll be looking at that as well. Okay. And then determining that the Oversight Committee meets regularly, so we can see, and I've been involved in some of these regular meetings, so we can see that, but we will be documenting that through looking at the exact minutes that resulted from the meetings, and if there were any issues in that, again, being reported outwardly to you all as part of the performance audit report. No issues identified so far. And then determine if the district sufficiently informs and engages community stakeholders about bond-funded projects for the fiscal year under audit. And so we'll be doing, again, some inquiries, looking at some of the communication processes that have took place during the year to make sure that, again, those were consistent with what you had expected and what we would have seen in the past years as well. Some example procedures listed there. Determine if the warranty monitoring and preventative maintenance process are in place and occurring. So again, just looking to make inquiries of the district personnel, looking to see if there were any maintenance schedules that we can review to really just validate that those things were moving forward as planned, that the warranty monitoring is there. Okay. So really, I know those procedures are kind of detailed. We've got a pretty good handle on where we're at with the status of those. We've got a communication, or excuse me, we've got requests out that management have provided a lot of information thus far to us, and we've got a bit of more to follow up that we're going to do as part of the year-end audit as we go to wrap up both the financial audit and the performance audit. And if we have any issues in that final testing phase, we'll be, if there's any immediate concerns, we'll definitely elevate to the committee and to the board. But you should see a final report from us based on that expected timeline that was mentioned earlier. So I really appreciate your time. I know there's a lot of good information in there, but if you have questions, I'm happy to expand on any particular procedure or topic that we had discussed there.
Well, thank you. I'd like to encourage any members of the committee to ask questions or have any comments to go ahead and welcome your input. Hearing none, I want to thank you, and if you're finished with all the presentation, then we can move on, and you can stick with us, or you can go ahead and return back to work or whatever you need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Salkeld. Thank you, Crow team. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, which is fiscal finance update by staff. So I'll turn that over to staff.
Mr. Munoz, I think we need to have Ms. Hernandez put our agenda back up, because I believe there's an approval of the minutes from our last meetings and maybe the one before, because there was no quorum at last meeting, that need to be approved.
Okay, do you want us to take that ahead of the fiscal finance update in the order of the agenda?
Crow was number 4.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing number 5 is approval of minutes.
No, I've got number 5 as fiscal finance update, but you're right, the approval of the minutes should probably go before that. So let's go to minutes. I've got it afterwards on my agenda. So let's see. Yeah. I have a different agenda. Okay. We'll go with approval of minutes of March 16, 2022. And are there any comments or questions on the minutes of March 16th, 2022 from? No comments? Okay, we'll note and file those minutes then. Minutes of June 15th, 2022. We had an informal minute. Approval is not necessarily required. Therefore, I think we've covered our bases. Janaea, are there any comments or questions that I need to address at this point?
I would go ahead and approve those minutes as well, based off the discussion that we had today, and what we learned in terms of how it all kind of unfolded. So I would just acknowledge it, and then we can move on, because technically the way it went last month, or when we were together last, you did establish quorum, but it wasn't until 6. There's weird formalities we don't need to get into right now. But anyway, I would move forward and approve both sets of minutes.
All right. We'll go ahead and approve and file the minutes of June 15, 2022. Unless there's any objections or comments, we'll move forward with that. There is no need for a full committee approval on those minutes. All right, hearing no other comments, we'll go ahead and note and file the minutes of March 16th, 2022 and June 15th, 2022. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, election of chair and co-chair. Normally the chair and co-chair term runs for 1 year. I currently serve as chair, and the vice chair was Claudia Albarca, and she has termed out. So I'd like to open up nominations for chair. Are there any recommendations for the committee? I'll note that if somebody nominates me to be chair, I won't object. Are there any comments from the committee?
You said you won't object?
I will not object if I am nominated to serve as chair for another term.
Okay, I nominate you.
And that is Kimberly?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
And that is Rudy?
Yes.
Okay. And all those in favor, just say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, hearing no other opposition, I am elected chair for another one-year term. Thank you, everybody. And thank you,
Congratulations,
Kimberly,
Mr. Munoz.
for being nominated. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Nominations for co-chair are now open. Are there any recommendations for, is it co-chair or vice chair? I just want to say that I had already talked to Estelle, and she has, if nominated, she would accept the position of vice chair. If there are any other nominations, you can present those now, and we can decide what we want to do. So I open that up to the committee for your comments and suggestions. I have no comments. Does that mean that there are no other suggestions for co-chair?
I'm not familiar with Estelle, but if she would like to do it and nobody else is saying, nominating anybody, then I'm okay with that.
All right. Is there a second to that?
I'll second, still vice chair.
Okay. Is that David?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we do have one nomination now. Are there any other nominations for co-chair, or should we go ahead and take the vote? All right. I will go ahead and say all those in favor of Estelle Andrade serving as vice chair, please say aye.
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 Aye also. Any opposition? All right, so we now have a co-chair, Estelle Andrade, and I will gladly serve as your chair. Thank you, Kimberly, for making those nominations. Let us move on to the next item on the agenda. Project updates and staff announcements.
Great, thank you. So I don't really have any general staff announcements to make. We do still have an open project manager position, which we continue to float and are not getting any active responses. I will say the committee itself has 2 open vacancies, the small business position and one of the parent positions. We have only received 1 applicant in the parent, and we don't typically do interviews until we have ideally 2 or 3 opportunities for our applicants, and we've received nothing so far for the small business. So we're continuing to promote that. We have our new website, if you by chance happen to see that today, and it's still alive and well for people to click on and to submit applications. We're promoting it through kind of the school district network communication to parents, and also on social media. So we will continue to do so until we get those 2 positions filled, or 2 spots on the committee filled. From a project perspective, we're kind of headed into a slowdown space, right? So we are literally putting the finishing touches on the small restroom concession at Sioux High, which will be nice. That's a multi-phased, over the better part of 10 years project. And so once we finalize that, we will finally be closing out that project in its entirety, which is exciting. And so it's a little bit mighty project, and it's gone pretty well, and we'll be closed out with that probably by the time we come back together again. Bonita Vista High School, for those of you who live in and around the area, probably seen the progress in that direction. It's getting exciting. It looks beautiful. And we are still trending towards turning over the field to the students for PE and for some sports and band practice by the end of September. There is a delay in some materials. I think I shared this last time, but I'll refresh everybody. Microchips, totally on delay, back order, not available, with several months pushed out. And then we also have some panels for that building that are extended delivery as well. All of that ties into the fire life safety system in terms of the microchips. And so we cannot turn the entire facility over until November, which means like Bonita will have like their home football games will be at other locations for the duration of this season. And then they'll be back up and running. But I think they're planning at the very end of September, the first event for the stadium will actually be, I think, girls field hockey, if I remember correctly. So that's kind of exciting. So more to come on that. And then Mar Vista High School is our only, our third and final project that's under construction, still on schedule to be completed by the end of November. The field is, or the pool is making great progress. I saw pictures today of rebar is down and starting to surround the pool. So they're really, you can see that project starting to really come together as well. If I can indulge you all for a second, I think I actually have, let me see, I might share my picture, my screen with you. I'm putting together a report that I owe at the end of this week, but I think I can show you two of those projects right now. Jason had sent over updated photos that I would happily share with you. Just give me half a second, because it is kind of fun to see that. I'm going to try to show it to you. I'm going to assume that just because you can't see me tonight, that you would be able, I can share my screen, that there's no weird glitch with that. So let me see if I can get there. And tell me if you can see this, my screen right now.
Not yet.
Yeah, it might not let me because my camera's, wait a minute, it should go now. What about now?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, forget it. It must be all interconnected to my camera and whatnot. So that's rejected and denied on my side. So that's sorry. I'm sorry. So we're done with that. We are going to transition into what would be a slower design time period as we move through this next year, and not a lot of active bond related construction, as we see the projects in front of us being completely closed out December. There might be a final pay app or two moving into January, but likely not at the rate those projects are moving forward. So that's exciting for us. And other than that, I think that's the culmination of my project updates for right now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Janaea. That's good. I've got a couple comments to add too. All of the committee members should have got a copy of the Oversight report to the Board of Trustees from June 27, 2022. And I want to thank David for attending that meeting at the Board of Trustees. So thank you, David. And I presented the information to the board, and it was well received. It's always fun to go to the board meetings. So I just wanted to make that announcement. And regarding the CBOC vacancies, I hope that we receive more applicants for the positions. I know I saw the principal for Castle Park High School today, and I let her know that there are vacancies for the student parent position. So she is aware of it, and hopefully she'll make an announcement somewhere with her contacts. And so we have 2 vacancies, and you have one from the business, one from the parents already, and you'd like to have more. Is that right, Janaea?
Typically, yes, we do. I mean, for anything, we would at least want to have 2 applicants in, and we only have 1 so far for parent, and we've had 0 applicants for the small business owner.
Wow. Well, I want to encourage all of you that if you know somebody who has a small business or has their own business, to please let them know that there is a vacancy, and hopefully we can find another committee member. We do have a good turnout today of
Mhm.
5 committee members. And I know that Estelle, she's graduating today with her master's degree. So
Yes, yes.
I
Mhm.
just want to put it on the record. We all want to congratulate her on her endeavors in education and furthering in education and bettering herself. So a special thank you to Estelle, to her, for her diligence and effort to furthering her career in education. And otherwise than that, Janelle, can you tell me who is absent today or not been available? And do you know?
I believe, unless we've had any let's check the, who I don't see here tonight. I don't see, unless he's here by call, then I can't see Manny Vasquez. And I think that's it, because the rest of you are here. There's 2 vacancies, and then Stal had already notified us after last meeting that she would not be in attendance tonight. So I think you have a full house with the exception of
Manny Vasquez.
Stal and Mr. Vasquez. Correct.
Yeah.
Mr. Munoz and Janelle.
And I don't know, Julie, did he reach out to you?
Yes, Manny Vasquez sent an email this evening saying that his work sent him out of town, so he was unable to attend.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And Manny is a representative for the general representative, or does he represent a specific group?
Manny is Taxpayer Association.
Taxpayers.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
And let's see. I believe I do not have any more comments myself. So Janelle, go ahead. You've got it. Unless we move on to the next item.
Yoli, can you pull the agenda back up? Then you're back. There you go, Ralph. Can you see now?
Yes.
Here, at number 8.
Item number 8, CBOC annual report of June 27th, 2022. And Janae and I have gotten together on that, and we're working on that. And maybe Janae, you want to add more information?
Are you for at number 8 at policies and regulations, Mr. Munoz?
Yes.
Okay. So, for some of you who have been here for a while, and so we've been talking about, there was going to be last year, the committee had created a subcommittee to explore any updates that may be needed to the current policies and procedures, because there are a few things in there that are just frankly outdated. And they reference Proposition O, and right now we have a Measure DD that's also been approved. So there's some language that needs to be more inclusive of different financial structures we have ahead of us. And so that never really got anywhere with the subcommittee. And so I took a run at it, and then Mr. Munoz and I we spoke today actually. And so I am offering my my table in my office for a small group to come in. Mr. Munoz, I think, is one, and maybe one other person to come in, and we can flesh through this, because the process is the committee needs to make an actual recommendation for for us to consider, and you say yes or no, or work on language together with. Then ultimately, once you have a unanimous consensus amongst your committee about what you want to recommend to take forward, I would take that forward to the superintendent, assuming there's no questions or changes there. Once we're all kind of in the same place, then it actually gets placed on the board for the board agenda for the board to approve. The last time this was done was back in 2013. So you can certainly see, and there was a lot happening back then, and there's some language associated to activities that took place back in 2013 that need to be removed. And just neutralized, so it moves us forward in a constructive way. So that's what the intention would be. So I have offered my service and time with Mr. Munoz for that effort, and then I would defer to him for the rest of that.
Thank you, Janelle.
Sure.
And thank you for offering to host a meeting between the subcommittee group. And at this point in time, I think we're very close to updating the policies and procedures. And I think, as Janaea said, if we get 1 or 2 volunteers, myself included, to meet with Janaea, go through the policies and procedures and regulations, we can resolve it pretty easily, bring it back to the full committee, and then once we review it and approve it, we can go ahead and let staff do their process for approval by the board. So if there are any questions or comments, I think Janaea and I would be happy to answer it. And I think I'm looking for one more person to volunteer to meet with myself and Janaea to kind of sit down and go through the policy and regulations. And I don't think it's going to take too much work because it's basically just a housekeeping item. And I think we can do it in an hour or so, maybe 2 at the most.
Yeah, and I do want to say that I think it's important. I mean, on the committee, I know that Mr. Munoz has a solid understanding of the policies and regulations because he's been on the committee for multiple years now. Many of you are new to us and to the committee. And unfortunately, Mr. Munoz he's in his 3rd and final term right now, right? And this time is moving very quickly. And so he only has
year.
Yeah, well, you have 2 more, right? Because it's a 3-year term. So you've technically, right? Or is this your 3rd one?
This is my 3rd term, and it's going to be 1 more year.
After this one, or is this the beginning of your 3rd? I thought this was the beginning of your 2nd to last year.
I thought it was the last.
Well, Yoli and I will take a look at that so we're all on the same page. But my point is that there is a sunset to Mr. Munoz's time with this committee, and we will be looking for, and ideally you want folks who understand this process backwards and forwards to take the reins moving forward. So it's an opportunity for folks to start stepping into a leadership participation role, if you will, moving forward.
Or at least become more knowledgeable.
Correct.
This is Rudy, and I was going to say I'd like to do this, but without stepping into leadership. My goodness.
You don't need to step into the position, but you can certainly be the 3rd party to bring us across the finish line for this collaboration, so we can get these updated.
I'm just kidding, but I would be interested in helping you with this endeavor.
Perfect.
Okay, good. And I do want to know that a while back, Estelle also expressed an interest. So, I mean, if you wouldn't mind, if Estelle is still interested, we move on with another committee member. So
I'm doing the math. I'm doing the math right now with 7 members. What is with 7 active members, because you have the 2 vacancies? What is your limit on subcommittee? Is it 2 or is it 3?
I don't believe there is a limit, but
There's
I haven't.
Not a limit. Okay.
I haven't checked the policy and procedures to know that for sure.
Okay. So we're saying interested parties are Mr. Munoz, Rudy, and then Stell. And we can coordinate from there. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, great. And then we'll set something up soon.
Yoli will take care of that. Yes.
And we'll get a copy of the policy and regulations to Rudy then.
Sounds good.
And Estelle. All right, great. We'll get that knocked out sooner than later. All right, that takes care of item number 8. And number 9 is the CBOC annual report.
I think you touched base on that earlier, though.
Yes. I may have taken it out of order, and I think that everybody should have got a copy of it, and it was well received by the board. I didn't have too many questions from the board, and I think they were generally overall they were pleased with my response.
Great.
Any comments or questions from anybody? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to the next item. Okay, it's the meeting schedule, upcoming meeting schedules.
Looks like our next meeting is on November 16th.
Correct.
We had been discussing, we have location is TBD. We had been discussing if the committee was ready to start moving back to in-person meetings. So I don't know if you want to discuss that.
I think we're ready.
Okay.
What's the rest of the committee think? Would you like to have a on-site meeting at one of the schools prior to our next meeting? And staff can set that up. I'd like to hear your comments or suggestions from the committee.
This is Rudy, and I think I'm ready. I thought tonight we were doing that, and I had to look at the agenda again to realize we were doing Zoom or whatever.
I think you're absolutely correct. I thought so too, but I didn't know that the school was going to be starting classes, in this time, and I think it's a little bit. I can understand why we didn't meet out of school, because it might have been a little bit of a tough to do that on-site meeting with a school starting two in the same week.
So what I would suggest is that we make our November 16th meeting at Hilltop Middle.
Great.
As classrooms completed, so we can see the 6-pack of classrooms we just finished. That we take our January meeting at Bonita. Many of us may have already seen the stadium at that point. And then we do our March meeting at Mar Vista.
Okay.
And then we can TBD the May location.
Okay. Sounds good. I like that.
Okay.
I like that a lot.
Just commit now and just put it on the calendar, and then we can coordinate with the site.
Great.
Okay.
No, I think things are starting to turn around. We still are cautious, but with caution, we will do it.
There you go.
All right, great. And we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Janelle.
Sure.
Our next item is new business, future agenda items. I don't have anything. Do any members of the committee have any comments, questions, or anything of general interest regarding the community or what you've seen, what you're doing?
Okay. This is Rudy. I don't have anything. I don't think it's anything that's under new agenda items. I just wanted to clarify, what are the positions that are still vacant? I think it's a business, and what was
Yes.
the other?
A business and a parent position. I'll have you, we'll send it back out to the committee tomorrow. We will send you all the link, because absolutely anybody who can be sending that out, there's a fleet of us working on it actively at the district. But a lot of you have relationships and connections out there. So tomorrow we'll send out the link to the webpage, and for you to be able to then forward on to anybody who you may know that might be interested, and then the application's available off the link.
And then on the small business person, can that be a self-employed person?
Yeah.
Okay.
As
And
long as they have their small, yeah, absolutely.
as long as they have the business license and.
Yep.
And,
there's a criteria. I don't remember the details. If you on that specific application, because it's specific to that, there are a couple of criteria that it said. I mean, it's nothing that all stuff they would have, but it tells them what the requirements are.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. And they have to be residents of the school district also, I think?
Yes,
Or no?
I believe they do. Yes.
Okay.
And that's always our preference as well, too, right? I mean, we're looking for folks who have a vested interest in our communities, so in our schools. So.
Okay, I encourage every one of the members to at least talk to one person, and hopefully we can get some more applicants.
So, Mr.
All right.
Munoz, I don't have new business, but I do have one more announcement that I did not include in my updates. When we see you all again in November, we will have, crossing all fingers and toes, have successfully gone to the market and sold 256 million, I think, is our current number of bonds, 200 out of Measure DD, and I think we're trending at 56 million out of Propo. So that's a huge success for the district, and it's very exciting. The finance team has been doing, Dr. Salkelt, as always, impeccable and extraordinary work with her team to get us prepared for this. Lots of diligence with finance folks from across the country. We're hosting some folks on the 31st, the rating agencies in the 1st, and continuing to do work to develop and prepare for us to go to the market. I don't know the specific date. I don't think that's even really been determined in September. It's more towards the later part of September. And then once that happens, then the money will hit our accounts at some point in the beginning part. It's usually about 3 to 4 weeks after sale, then the money is actually available to us. And so I wanted to share that and ask everybody to continue to send us positive vibes on that, so that we can continue to bring forward new facilities for students. So we're really excited about this opportunity.
Great, great, thank you. And if the money comes through, it'll be available for projects starting when?
We would be able to hit the ground running pretty quick. So
Good.
Yeah, it'll put us in that position, and then the trajectory that we're looking at, provided that AVs continue to hold, we are like for Propo, like Mr. Munoz, we haven't seen really any Propo money in since 2018, and it was a small amount. This will start putting us on a cycle for Propo where we're getting, the estimate is about 25 million to 35 million about every other year out of Propo moving forward, which is great because that's a nice pocket of money that we can continue to put into very specific sizable projects. And then the original for DD was that there would be 3 issuances, but DD, Measure DUD was $403 million. Our first issuance will be half of that. So I'm not sure, it's still undetermined at this time if the rest of it would just be in a second issuance or if it would be split and we would end up still doing 2 more issuances behind that in the next 4 to 5 years. And we'll do those in pretty rapid succession, the balance of DD. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So if there were no other comments from the committee members, we can adjourn. But before we adjourn, I want to thank our most recent member of the committee, Kimberly Tesonora. Is that good? Did I say that correctly? I want to thank you for joining our group. I don't think we've officially welcomed you, but welcome.
Thank you.
So let us go ahead and adjourn the meeting then. The meeting can now adjourn at a little bit after 7 then. Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you at Hilltop Middle School next. Thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Take care.